Humans defy the Vortan-X. The final battle for the galaxy, the dark expanse of space, was quiet, as it always had been, stretching endlessly beyond the grasp of any civilization. For eons, the Vortan-X Empire had ruled over countless star systems, their dominance felt across the galaxy. Their military might was unmatched, their fleets enormous and unstoppable, leaving nothing but scorched planets and broken civilizations in their wake. In every corner of space, the mere mention of their name sent shivers down the spines of those who still remembered what fear truly felt like. Yet, in the midst of their unchallenged reign, something unexpected happened. On the edge of their empire, in a system that hadn't even been properly mapped, a small blip appeared on their sensors. At first, it was nothing, just a faint signal lost in the constant noise of the universe. But as the Vortan-X Empire's great warships patrolled the outer reaches of their territory, the blip grew stronger, more defined. A human ship, perhaps small, unremarkable but for reasons unknown, it was broadcasting an encrypted message that even their advanced systems couldn't decode. It wasn't a standard military transmission or a distress signal. It was something different, and that alone made it worth investigating. They sent a cruiser, the V Ravager, to investigate, expecting little more than an insignificant anomaly. The humans were a primitive species, after all, scattered across their own planet with little hope of ever becoming a real threat. The V Ravager moved swiftly through the darkness, its engines roaring as it approached the source of the signal. It was only when they came within striking range that the crew of the cruiser saw the human ship in full view. It was barely more than a speck against the backdrop of the stars, no bigger than a small freighter, its design outdated by millennia. The ship seemed almost to mock the Vortan-X fleet's power, a single, insignificant speck in the vastness of space. A smile crept across the commander's face as he saw the human ship in the distance. This would be an easy victory. They would show the humans what true power looked like. "Lock onto the ship's coordinates," the commander ordered, his voice cold and filled with anticipation. The V Ravager's weapon systems hummed to life as the crew readied themselves for what was certain to be a simple operation. But as they closed in, something strange happened. The human ship began to move. Not in retreat, as any sensible species would, but forward toward the V Ravager. The Vortan-X commander raised an eyebrow. "What are they doing?" he murmured. But before anyone could respond, the human ship fired. A single, brilliant bolt of energy shot from the human vessel, slamming into the V Ravager with such force that the cruiser's shields flared violently. For a moment, the Vortan-X crew stared in stunned silence, their jaws dropping. The human ship, that small speck in the vast expanse of space, had just breached their supposedly impenetrable shields. It was an impossible thing. How could something so tiny damage one of their most powerful warships? "What kind of weapon is this?" someone muttered in disbelief. The commander's calm demeanor faltered as the realization hit him. The humans weren't as weak as they had thought. They were stronger than they had expected. And they weren't afraid. The commander's orders rang out, though his voice now carried a hint of uncertainty. "Return fire. Do not let them mock us." The V Ravager unleashed a barrage of its own weapons, beams of destruction tearing through space toward the human ship. But the humans, unfazed, did something entirely unexpected. They didn't try to dodge, and they didn't flee. Instead, they laughed. It wasn't just a nervous chuckle. It was a defiant, mocking laugh, loud enough to be heard through the communication channel as the human commander spoke. "Is that the best you've got?" The words hit the Vortan-X crew like a slap in the face. Who were these humans to mock them? The galaxy knew that the Vortan-X Empire was untouchable. Yet here they were, facing a species that not only refused to yield, but taunted them as if their power was nothing. The human commander's voice came through the speaker again, dripping with arrogance. "Come on now. We were expecting something a bit more impressive." The Vortan-X commander clenched his fists, anger rising within him. How could the humans be so bold? Didn't they understand the gravity of their situation? Didn't they know who they were up against? Yet, as the battle raged on, the Vortan-X crew quickly realized that this wasn't a typical fight. The humans weren't fighting for survival alone. They were fighting with an almost reckless abandon, as if their very existence was built on defiance. Every shot they took, every move they made, was calculated to expose weaknesses in the Vortan-X's defenses. Their ship, though small, was nimble and fast, darting around their larger opponents with ease. It was clear now that the humans were not just another species to be crushed. They were different. They fought with an unshakable confidence that, if anything, only made the Vortan-X even more infuriated. They were beginning to realize that they weren't dealing with a typical, unimportant race. These humans had something that made them dangerous. And it wasn't just their weapons, it was their spirit. The V-Ravager, still trying to recover from the shock of the initial strike, aimed its weapons at the human vessel again. But no matter what they did, no matter how much firepower they unleashed, the humans always seemed to stay one step ahead. It wasn't just tactics, it was the way they fought. They were unpredictable, mocking the enemy even as they ripped through their ranks. Each successful hit on a Vortan-X ship was met with an immediate transmission from the human commander. That one was a little too easy. Got anything harder? It was infuriating. This was supposed to be a show of power. Instead, the humans were turning their perceived weakness into their greatest strength. The Vortan-X Empire's might, honed over centuries of conquering, was suddenly called into question. For the first time, they were losing to a species they had once considered insignificant. The human fleet, despite its small size and humble appearance, had dealt the first blow to the Vortan-X Empire. And as the V-Ravager staggered from another direct hit, the commander's mind raced. What was happening? How were these humans doing this? Had they been underestimated so badly? And worse, could they stop them before it was too late? With a final, mocking laugh that echoed in the cold void of space, the human commander sent one last message. We'll see you again soon. Try not to fall apart before we get back. And just like that, they were gone, leaving the Vortan-X Empire to face an unexpected future. One where they were no longer the undisputed rulers of the galaxy. The humans had arrived, and they had made it very clear the galaxy was not as safe as the Vortan-X had believed. The Vortan-X Empire, once confident in their unchallenged rule, now found themselves in the midst of an unsettling reality. After the surprise skirmish with the humans, something that had been dismissed as a minor irritation, a deep unease began to settle across the Empire's leadership. News of the encounter with the small human fleet spread rapidly through the ranks, but it was the mocking tone of the human commanders that echoed in the minds of the Vortan-X officials. How could they, the greatest empire in the galaxy, be bested by such a primitive race? This wasn't just about power, it was about pride. The Vortan-X Empire could not, let this insult go unanswered. High Emperor Zorath, a being known for his ruthless decisiveness, wasted no time in ordering a full-scale military response. His flagship, the V-Imperium, was one of the largest warships ever built, a symbol of the Empire's might. It had never met an opponent it couldn't defeat. The ship was a massive fortress in space, its cannons capable of leveling entire planets with a single volley. If the humans thought they could challenge such power, they were gravely mistaken. Zorath's mind raced as he considered the tactics needed to ensure a swift and humiliating victory. The Empire had countless fleets, each more powerful than anything the humans could have imagined. He would crush them quickly, demonstrate to the galaxy that the Vortan-X Empire's superiority was absolute. Without hesitation, Zorath commanded his fleet to move toward the human-held territory, a region at the fringe of the Empire. The human fleet, still a mysterious force, had retreated into a nearby star system after the encounter with the V-Ravager, but this time there would be no escape. With over 40 warships, including the mighty V-Imperium, Zorath's fleet made its way through the stars, the enormity of its presence creating ripples across the galaxy. The humans would be caught off guard, Zorath thought. They would never see what was coming. The the fleet approached the humans' outer defenses. The Vortan-X admiral in charge of the assault, Commander Drake, received orders to engage immediately. The humans were unaware of the full force heading their way. They had no idea what kind of wrath was about to fall upon them. Drake's ships moved into position, and with a cold efficiency, they launched a bombardment of energy pulses toward the human fleet's last known position. The first strike was overwhelming, massive bursts of energy ripping through the vast emptiness of space. The Vortan-X didn't hold back. They fired indiscriminately, confident that any human resistance would crumble under the weight of their superior technology. The universe shuddered as the first salvo tore through the silence. However, the humans weren't as surprised as the Vortan-X had hoped. Deep within their command center, the human fleet commander, Captain Claire Reynolds, watched the incoming attack with a focused calm. She had known this was coming. After the first encounter, the humans had spent the past few weeks preparing, calculating their response. The humans had no illusions about their disadvantage in terms of firepower, but they were learning fast. The human fleet had been quickly reinforced by ships from Earth and allied systems, and the humans had adapted. Their weapons, though primitive compared to the might of the Vortan-X, were now far more advanced than before. Reynolds turned to her officers. "All ships, prepare to engage," she ordered, her voice steady, her face betraying none of the tension that was slowly building inside her. "We're going to give them a fight they'll never forget." The bridge erupted into motion as the crew followed her commands. The human fleet, though smaller in number, had learned something from their first skirmish. Mobility and unpredictability were their greatest strengths. While the Vortan-X fleet relied on sheer firepower and size, the humans would use their speed and agility to strike at weak points, to exploit every opportunity for a counterattack. As the Vortan-X ships continued their bombardment, the human fleet broke apart into smaller groups. The maneuver was swift and sudden, catching the Vortan-X off guard. The first wave of fire from the humans didn't target the larger ships of the Vortan-X fleet. Instead, they aimed at the smaller, more vulnerable support vessels that made up the backbone of the Empire's logistics. Within moments, 2 Vortan-X destroyers exploded into a ball of fire, their massive hulls cracking under the precision fire of human plasma cannons. The destruction was swift, and it stunned the Vortan-X forces. The humans weren't retreating. They were fighting back. Drac, furious at the sight of his ships being destroyed, called for reinforcements. The Vortan-X ships regrouped, forming a massive wall of steel, energy shields flickering as they prepared to retaliate. Yet, every time they tried to push forward, the humans struck again. The humans didn't engage in a direct assault. Instead, they used hit-and-run tactics, hitting with precision and then vanishing before the Vortan-X could retaliate. They had become masters of evasion, constantly staying just out of the reach of the Vortan-X's firepower. The human fleet commander, Captain Reynolds, was relentless. She didn't flinch, even when the Vortan-X fired a devastating barrage that nearly obliterated one of her ships. "Hold steady," she called to her crew, her voice unshaken. The humans were learning how to read the Vortan-X movements, anticipating their strikes before they even happened. It wasn't just about firepower. It was about knowing the enemy better than they knew themselves. But even with their growing success, the humans knew they were outnumbered. Reynolds understood that the fight would not last forever. They couldn't keep this up indefinitely, not with the sheer scale of the Vortan-X assault. She needed to strike a decisive blow, something that would cripple the Vortan-X morale and force them to rethink their strategy. She had a plan, one that would take the Vortan-X by surprise. As the battle raged on, Reynolds ordered a new maneuver. It was risky, but it was the only chance they had. The human fleet split once again, but this time, they didn't scatter into smaller groups. Instead, they moved as a single unit, heading straight for the heart of the Vortan-X formation. The humans had learned the Vortan-X's one weakness, their over-reliance on the size and power of their ships. They were slow, unwieldy. If they could strike fast enough, they could hit them before they even had a chance to react. With a roar, the human fleet surged forward, and the Vortan-X ships fired in a desperate attempt to stop them. But it was too late. The humans had already closed the gap, and with a series of brilliant shots, they disabled the V Imperium, the flagship of the Vortan-X fleet. The mighty ship, once thought invincible, was now nothing more than a floating wreck, its engines sputtering, its shields failing. For a brief moment, everything seemed to go silent. The Vortan-X fleet hesitated, staring at the destruction before them. The humans had done the impossible. They had crippled the very symbol of the Vortan-X Empire's power. But the battle was far from over. Zorath, from his command center aboard the V Imperium, howled in rage. This was not the end. He would not allow his empire to fall. But in the back of his mind, a seed of doubt began to grow. The humans were more than just a threat. They were a challenge that had never been faced before. And now, for the first time in their history, the Vortan-X were on the defensive. The tide had turned. As the human fleet regrouped, preparing for the next phase of the battle, Reynolds couldn't help but feel the weight of what they had just achieved. They had struck the first real blow, but the war was far from over. The Vortan-X were not going to give up easily. But for the first time, the humans felt a surge of hope. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something far more important. The galaxy had underestimated them. And now, they were going to make the Vortan-X regret it. The battle had shifted in unexpected ways. The humans, once seen as little more than a nuisance, had proven they were far more dangerous than the Vortan-X could ever have imagined. Their victory over the mighty V Imperium had sent shockwaves through the Empire, and now the Vortan-X were scrambling to regroup. High Emperor Zorath stood on the command deck of his flagship, staring out into the vastness of space. His eyes burned with fury, but beneath the anger, there was something else, a growing sense of uncertainty. Never had the Vortan-X faced such resistance. Never had they encountered an enemy that not only fought with skill, but also mocked their strength at every turn. The V Imperium was crippled, and the once unstoppable fleet was now in disarray. But Zorath refused to show weakness. He slammed his fist against the control panel, the sound echoing through the chamber. "This cannot continue," he muttered under his breath. "We will crush them." His voice was firm, but it carried a hint of desperation that he couldn't hide. Across the galaxy, the Vortan-X fleet was reorganizing, their commanders now more cautious, more calculating. They had underestimated the humans, and that mistake had cost them dearly. But they wouldn't make it again. Zorath was determined to make sure of that. The Vortan-X were known for their relentless pursuit of victory. Now, they would make sure to teach the humans the full extent of their power. They would strike hard, strike fast, and this time they would not be taken by surprise. Meanwhile, on the human side, things were looking different. Captain Claire Reynolds stood on the bridge of the human flagship, the Eagle's Pride. The atmosphere was tense, but for the first time since the battle began, her team had done the impossible. They had crippled the V Imperium, a blow that no one, not even the most experienced strategists, had expected. The Vortan-X Empire, the largest and most powerful empire in the galaxy, had suffered a critical wound. But Reynolds knew they weren't out of danger yet. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Vortan-X would regroup. They would retaliate. And they would come with everything they had. "Status report," Reynolds said, her voice calm despite the storm raging inside her. Her first officer, Lieutenant Heron, quickly delivered the news. "The fleet is holding steady, Captain. The damage to the V Imperium has crippled their main force, but we still have over 30 warships bearing down on us. They're regrouping at the edge of the Nebula Zeta." "They won't stop," Reynolds replied, her eyes narrowing. "They'll come at us with everything. We have to be ready." The humans had scored a decisive blow, but Zorath was not a leader to be easily defeated. The Vortan-X would learn from their mistakes, adapt their tactics, and come back with a vengeance. Reynolds knew the stakes had never been higher. This battle would decide more than just the fate of their fleet. It would shape the future of the galaxy. As the human fleet prepared for the inevitable counterattack, the atmosphere aboard the Eagle's Pride grew heavy with the weight of anticipation. Every crew member knew what was coming. The battle ahead would be unlike anything they had faced before. But there was a sense of resolve among them. They had already taken down the mighty V Imperium. If they could do that, they could stand against whatever the Vortan-X threw at them. A few hours later, the Vortan-X fleet arrived at the edge of the nebula Zeta, a vast expanse of space filled with cosmic dust and electrical storms. It was a perfect place to launch a decisive attack, a place where the human fleet's small size would be at a disadvantage. Zorath had been planning this moment ever since the humans had struck. It was time to show them the true power of the Vortan-X. His fleet, now more coordinated and focused, moved forward in formation, their massive warships lined up like a wall of destruction. The humans, however, had made a bold move of their own. They had anticipated the Vortan-X would come at them in force, and they had set a trap. As the Vortan-X fleet entered the nebula Zeta, they found themselves in an unexpected position. The human fleet was nowhere to be seen. The dust and storms of the nebula distorted their sensors, and for a moment the Vortan-X commanders thought they had miscalculated. "Where are they?" Drake, one of the lead commanders, barked. Zorath's face darkened. "They're here," he said. "Somewhere." And just as he spoke, the silence of space was broken by a series of explosions. The humans had launched a surprise attack, targeting the Vortan-X support ships and small frigates that were scattered among the larger warships. These were the vulnerable points in the Vortan-X formation, and the humans had learned to exploit them. From the chaos of the nebula, human ships emerged, firing with pinpoint accuracy, hitting their targets with deadly precision. The Vortan-X responded quickly, but the humans were already on the move, disappearing back into the dust clouds before the Vortan-X could retaliate. The humans weren't just striking. They were dancing around their enemies, taking shots where the Vortan-X least expected it. The Vortan-X warships struggled to keep up with the small, agile human ships that zipped in and out of the storm. Zorath clenched his fists, his rage building. He had underestimated them again. They were faster, more unpredictable than he had thought. "Engage them. Don't let them escape," he ordered, his voice like ice. The battle raged on, but the Vortan-X, despite their size and strength, were starting to lose their advantage. The humans, with their smaller ships, were able to move with incredible agility, firing quickly and then vanishing into the nebula. It was becoming clear to Zorath that this wasn't going to be an easy victory. The humans had thrown off every calculation he had made. They were turning his own tactics against him, and they were winning. After hours of brutal combat, the Vortan-X fleet was beginning to show signs of strain. Several of their ships were heavily damaged, and the rest of their forces were scattered, unable to mount a cohesive defense. It was then that Reynolds made her move. She knew the time had come to strike decisively. The human fleet had been chipping away at the Vortan-X for hours, but now it was time to break their spirit completely. The Eagle's Pride, at the center of the human fleet, moved toward the heart of the Vortan-X formation, its weapons powered up and ready to fire. As the ship neared the core of the Vortan-X fleet, a sense of anticipation filled the air. The Vortan-X were starting to retreat, their fleet crumbling under the constant barrage. It was clear that the Vortan-X had not anticipated a species capable of such resilience and adaptability. With one final calculated strike, Reynolds ordered the Eagle's Pride to fire at the Vortan-X flagship, the V Ravager. The shot was perfect. The Vortan-X flagship was hit directly, and the once mighty warship erupted in a violent explosion. The heart of the Vortan-X fleet was shattered. For the first time, the humans had proven not only their strength but their ability to outthink their enemies at every turn. Zorath, watching from the wreckage of his flagship, understood. The tide had truly turned, and the Vortan-X Empire would never be the same again. The Vortan-X Empire was on the edge of something they had never experienced before, a true existential crisis. Their fleet was crippled, their mighty warships broken, and their arrogance shattered. High Emperor Zorath, once the embodiment of the Empire's unstoppable might, now paced angrily across the command deck of his shattered flagship. The loss of the V Imperium had been a devastating blow, but the destruction of the V Ravager, the heart of their remaining fleet, was something Zorath could not accept. How could this be happening? The humans, a race so young, so weak compared to the vast power of the Vortan-X, had humiliated them on the battlefield. It was not just a defeat. Zorath stood at the viewport, his gaze fixed on the remnants of his fleet as they limped through the wreckage of the nebula. The human ships, small and nimble, still circled like predators, picking off the weak, causing chaos wherever they went. How? Zorath muttered again, his voice low and filled with frustration. How could these humans defeat us? They've taken everything we had and they're mocking us. Mocking the very foundation of the Vortan-X Empire. His fury was palpable, but so too was the nagging doubt beginning to creep into his mind. He had never expected this. It wasn't just their tactics, no, it was their behavior. The humans didn't just fight with skill, they fought with audacity, with a confidence that grated against the honor the Vortan-X held so dear. The first time they had encountered human ships in battle, the Vortan-X had thought it would be an easy victory. But now, as Zorath looked at the broken remnants of his fleet, he understood something he had been too proud to admit. The humans were not just a threat, they were an unpredictable force that had already changed the course of the war. Zorath's frustration began to boil over. "We need to strike back hard," he declared, turning toward his subordinates. "Gather the remaining forces. I want every ship ready to leave this system and wipe the humans from existence." His command was sharp, his words punctuated by an anger that seemed to fill the room. The officers under him scrambled to comply, but Zorath knew it wasn't just about gathering ships. It was about salvaging what remained of the Empire's reputation. The Vortan-X Empire had never been humiliated like this before. The universe would see it. Zorath's mind raced as he thought of how to recover from this blow. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, Captain Claire Reynolds stood on the bridge of the Eagle's Pride, her face illuminated by the cold light of the control screens. Her fleet had been successful. They had crippled the Vortan-X, humiliated them in ways no one had thought possible. But the humans were not celebrating. There was no time for celebration. The war was far from over. The Vortan-X were regrouping, rebuilding their strength, and it was only a matter of time before they came back with a vengeance. Reynolds had a plan. She had always known the Vortan-X would strike again. Their defeat would be seen as an affront to their pride, and no empire like theirs could ever accept that without seeking retribution. But she wasn't just preparing for a defensive fight. The humans had a unique advantage that the Vortan-X didn't fully understand: unpredictability. The Vortan-X relied on their overwhelming strength, their discipline, and their rigid strategies. The humans? They had learned to adapt, to change tactics on the fly, and to turn the enemy's strengths against them. It was this flexibility, this willingness to adapt to every changing circumstance that had allowed the humans to get so far. And it was this trait that Reynolds intended to exploit. As she stood on the bridge, gazing out at the endless stretch of stars, Reynolds turned toward her crew. "We've humiliated them once," she said quietly. "But that's not enough. We need to make sure they know that this fight isn't just about winning battles. It's about changing the future of this galaxy. We need to hit them harder than ever before, take the fight to them in ways they don't expect." Her words were not just a command, they were a promise. The humans had already achieved the impossible, and now it was time to show the Vortan-X that this war was not theirs to win. Not anymore. The next few days were a flurry of activity. Human ships were refitted, rearmed, and given new strategies to implement. Reynolds' plan was bold, and it would take the entire fleet's skill and daring to pull it off. The Vortan-X would never see it coming. Days later, as Zorath prepared to launch his final assault against the humans, something strange happened. The first human strike came with no warning. Out of nowhere, a small fleet of human ships jumped into the system, right in the heart of the Vortan-X territory. The audacity was beyond anything Zorath had ever imagined. The humans didn't wait for the Vortan-X to come to them. They came straight for the heart of the Empire, without hesitation or fear. The Vortan-X had been expecting another defensive engagement. They had prepared to fight on their terms, in familiar space where they could dictate the battle. Instead, the humans brought the war to their doorstep. The human fleet attacked immediately, targeting the Vortan-X supply stations and research facilities, striking at the heart of the Empire's infrastructure. There was no grand battle, no massive confrontation. It was guerrilla warfare, and it was humiliating. Zorath watched in disbelief as the human ships began to pick apart his empire's foundations, one facility at a time. He had never imagined they would have the audacity to attack so deep within Vortan-X space. "It's a trick," he growled, slamming his fist against the control panel again. "They're mocking us. They know we can't catch them." And yet, for all his anger, Zorath couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of admiration for the humans. They were fearless, reckless even, but their actions were devastating. Each strike by the humans was precise and quick, and before the Vortan-X fleet could mount a response, the human ships were gone, leaving only destruction in their wake. The mockery didn't stop there. As Zorath tried to regroup and pursue the humans, the Vortan-X received a broadcast. It wasn't a message of surrender or negotiation. It was a challenge. A single line, spoken with unshakable confidence, played over the speakers of every ship in the fleet. "You think you can win? Watch us, Vortan-X." It was Claire Reynolds' voice. The same voice that had commanded her fleet to victory before. The same voice that now carried a message not just of defiance, but of unrelenting confidence. The message wasn't just a taunt, it was a declaration. The humans weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to change the entire balance of power. They had already humiliated the Vortan-X once. Now, they would make sure the galaxy knew they were no longer a race to be underestimated. And as the Vortan-X tried to respond, to launch their retaliation, the humans had already disappeared into the vastness of space, leaving only the sting of their words and their actions behind. The mockery was complete. For Zorath, the galaxy seemed to tilt on its axis. The humans weren't just challenging the Vortan-X Empire, they were forcing the entire galaxy to recognize their power. And for the first time in his life, Zorath felt something he had never known: doubt. The turning point had come, and there was no going back. The Vortan-X Empire was no longer the dominant force in the galaxy. The humans had made sure of that. The galaxy was no longer what it had once been. The Vortan-X Empire, the fearsome and unchallenged power that had once ruled with an iron fist, was now crumbling. Its once unstoppable fleet lay shattered in the void, its command fractured under the weight of repeated defeats. High Emperor Zorath, the embodiment of Vortan-X might, stood on the balcony of his warship, staring out into the expanse of space, his mind swirling with frustration, doubt, and a growing sense of dread. The humans had done what no one had thought possible. They had broken the Vortan-X Empire. Zorath had underestimated them, and now the consequences were too vast to ignore. The mockery, the humiliation, they were no longer just insults. They were a warning, a signal that the Vortan-X Empire's time in the galaxy was coming to an end. For the past few days, Zorath had been preparing for what he believed would be the final confrontation. He had rallied what was left of his fleet, pulling together every warship and fighter he could find. The time had come to make the humans pay. But despite the show of force, something felt wrong. Even with the Vortan-X fleet's overwhelming numbers, he felt uneasy. The humans had already taken so much from him. Now, they were about to face their final challenge, and Zorath could not shake the nagging thought that this time would be different. Back on the human side, Captain Claire Reynolds was feeling the weight of the battle ahead. The humans had humbled the Vortan-X before, but now the time had come to end it once and for all. Reynolds stood in the command center of the Eagle's Pride, her fingers hovering over the control panel. She knew what was at stake. The entire future of the galaxy depended on this final confrontation. The Vortan-X, despite their crushing losses, would not go down without a fight. But the humans had something the Vortan-X could never have: the will to win. "We're not just fighting for survival anymore," Reynolds said to her crew, her voice steady but filled with the weight of their task. "We're fighting for the future. This is the reckoning we've been waiting for. The Vortan-X are broken, but they will not go down quietly. It's time to finish this." Her words resonated through the crew, each person aware that the battle ahead would be unlike anything they had faced before. The Vortan-X would not let go of their empire without one last brutal attempt to crush the humans who had dared defy them. The human fleet, still wounded but determined, moved into position. They had fought the Vortan-X on their terms, and now they would make sure the Vortan-X knew exactly what it meant to face a human resolve. For the first time in this war, there was no more fear, no more uncertainty. The humans were ready. The Eagle's Pride led the charge, its massive guns aimed directly at the heart of the remaining Vortan-X fleet. Behind them, hundreds of smaller human ships flanked the flagship, their weapons primed, their tactics refined by months of relentless battle. Zoreth's fleet, meanwhile, was poised for its own strike. The Vortan-X were outnumbered, but they were still a force to be reckoned with. Their ships were larger, stronger, and better equipped for long-range fire. Zoreth believed he still had the upper hand, but he was beginning to realize that the human unpredictability was something he could not overcome with sheer power. The time for traditional tactics had passed. The humans were fast, nimble, and completely unwilling to play by the Vortan-X's rules. The final battle began with a shockwave. The Vortan-X fired first, their guns lighting up the void with streams of deadly energy. The Eagle's Pride and its fleet swiftly dodged the onslaught, expertly weaving between the blasts with precision and grace. Human ships fired back, their shots striking Vortan-X vessels with alarming accuracy. The initial skirmish was like the calm before the storm. Zoreth, watching from his flagship, ordered his fleet to close in. But every time the Vortan-X attempted to form a blockade, the humans were already moving. The Vortan-X were too slow, too predictable. Reynolds knew the key to this fight wasn't brute force, it was speed. They couldn't match the Vortan-X in sheer power, but they could outmaneuver them. With every attack, the humans grew bolder, drawing closer to the Vortan-X command ships and hitting vital systems with deadly precision. The Vortan-X ships began to falter, their once mighty formation collapsing under the relentless human assault. Zoreth's face twisted in fury. How were they doing this? How were the humans, with their smaller ships, faster and more adaptable than his own? The Vortan-X were the mightiest species in the galaxy. And yet, here they were, being outclassed by the very race they had once thought beneath them. In the midst of the chaos, something unexpected happened. The Eagle's Pride and its fleet engaged the Vortan-X flagship, the Dreadstar, head-on. The human ships surrounded it, their smaller size allowing them to move with incredible speed, dodging the Vortan-X blasts. Within minutes, the Vortan-X flagship was surrounded, its once impenetrable defenses now breached by the continuous barrage of human fire. The Dreadstar's shields flickered, its hull scarred and smoking. Zoreth's heart pounded as he realized the inevitable. This was it, the end of the Vortan-X reign. On the Eagle's Pride, Reynolds saw the opening. She ordered the final strike. Her crew prepared, and with a single command, the ship's main cannon fired. The blast was perfect, striking the Dreadstar at its most vulnerable point. The explosion was massive. The flagship shuddered and broke apart, its once mighty presence now reduced to space debris. A cheer erupted among the human crew. The flagship of the Vortan-X Empire, the symbol of their dominance, was gone. Zoreth watched in horror as his empire's heart was torn from within. His flagship, his symbol of power, lay in ruins. For a moment, there was silence. The Vortan-X fleet seemed to hesitate, their commanders unsure of what to do next. The humans had done the impossible. They had not only defeated the might of the Vortan-X fleet, but they had crushed the very soul of the Empire itself. But it wasn't just the destruction of the Dreadstar that left Zoreth speechless, it was the realization that the humans had outlasted them. The Vortan-X had fought with everything they had, but the humans had never stopped. They had always been one step ahead. It was clear now, the Vortan-X Empire was finished. The humans had rewritten the rules of the galaxy. Zoreth, beaten and broken, fell to his knees on the command deck of his remaining warship. His empire had fallen. The galaxy, once under the control of the Vortan-X, was now in the hands of the humans. The reckoning had come. And for the first time in his life, Zoreth felt the full weight of defeat. As the remnants of the Vortan-X fleet scattered into the void, trying to escape the human onslaught, Reynolds stood tall on the Eagle's Pride. She knew the war was over. The humans had won. They had proven their strength, their resilience, and their ability to stand against the odds. And now, as the galaxy looked on, they would make sure the Vortan-X knew that the future would no longer belong to empires built on fear. The humans had arrived. and they would never be underestimated again.